What's up, folks? Welcome to Sunday. Easy, like Sunday morning, as I like to say. Beautiful, beautiful morning. Beautiful week scheduled. The fair is over. The North Carolina State Fair is over, thank goodness. Enough of all that traffic and fireworks and people and everything else. My goodness gracious. I hope everybody had fun if they went, but I'm just going to tell you right now, I'm so glad it's over. Anywho, I hope you enjoy your week. This week, new opportunities, and off we go. The answer to the previous trivia question was, believe it or not, it was lynching. If you can believe this, there was a time in this country, right, where the President of the United States of America had to stand in front of a group of people and say, you know, folks, I just want you to know, lynching is wrong. Yeah, that really happened. This was the time period of the presidency of Harding's predecessor. Okay, let's go back just a little bit from 1930 to 1921. This was Woodrow Wilson, right? This era was the worst era of race-based violence in the United States since Reconstruction, since the Civil War. Things had gotten a lot worse since Reconstruction after the Civil War, okay? This was a national problem, too. It was not just confined to the South. This was the era of what were known as race riots, okay? Hundreds of African Americans were murdered in these occurrences during these race riots. It's been documented that in the 1920s, lynching claimed, that the act of lynching claimed on average the lives of 2 African Americans every week. And this was probably more. That's just what they were able to document, okay, in some parts of the United States during that time. It was a huge time for the KKK. The 1920s were, without question. There's plenty of film and documentary and footage of the KKK marching in Washington, D.C., right? So racism was at a peak. Lynching was at a peak, right? These were major issues for Harding coming into the office of the President of the United States, the 29th president. Right? So through his term in office though his term was in office, had a lot of scandal to it. Remember the Teapot Dome? That was part of a previous trivia question, and your high school history class if you're paying attention. Harding went down in history as being sensitive to the plights of minorities. Now, the speech he delivered on October 21st of 1921, which was the focus of the trivia question, was part of Birmingham, Alabama's 50th anniversary celebration. It was delivered to a very large multiracial crowd that was reported and documented in newspapers to be more than 100,000 people. This was a large crowd of people that heard him speak that day. In his speech, Harding did condemn the act of lynching. He was known as referring to lynching as barbaric, quote unquote, and had given similar speeches in front of Congress before visiting Birmingham that October. I think it was in April when he went in front of Congress, and he did the same thing. He condemned lynching. The way he did it, however, which has been criticized by historians over time, was more of a broader discussion of racism and race relations. He focused on industry, right? He made references to educational opportunities, focused on labor. Okay, remember he was a politician, so he's kind of tiptoeing around the issue and addressing it at the same time without question. Again, he's a politician. This is the 1920s. KKK had a lot of influence. Again, they had marched in Washington. Overall, his speech really called for the type of equality that ultimately benefited the nation's economy more so than it did any community of people. Again, socially or in a civil rights aspect of things, okay? It dealt with labor and economy, right? Even though he was willing to publicly state that he considered the act of lynching a horrific, quote-unquote, stain on the country. And that's something without question or hesitation definitely needed to be done about it. He was willing to go that far, right? He was willing to cover things in that regard to a certain extent in public in Birmingham in the 1920s, unlike any of his predecessors had done before. So we're making some progress here, right? Harding was sympathetic to African Americans, for sure. He does get some props for that, without question. His speech was groundbreaking, yes, but it still left much work to be done. Just as equally a big yes in that regard, okay? So that's kind of how that speech went down in history. A couple of geek factoids. Harding's support for what was known as the Dyer Bill, which was in the 1920s, which would have established lynching as a federal crime, was not voiced in Birmingham. Again, he was only willing to go so far with things, right? Even though he was willing to address the issues, right? He didn't bring up the Dyer Bill. The Dyer Bill in the 1920s passed the House of Representatives, right? But it died in the Senate. Okay, it was the era of Jim Crow. So even though some efforts were made to get stuff on the books to illegalize, to make lynching illegal, a federal crime, which it was to begin with, for crying out loud, even from a congressional aspect, things were not getting done. New legislation protecting the civil rights of African Americans, as we all know, wasn't enacted until the Civil Rights Act of 1964, folks. Like some 40 odd years later, right? That's how we make progress in this country, okay? And then after that, racism was systemic, which it is today. So there you go. So that's President Harding in his very historic speech in Birmingham, Alabama on October 21st of 1923, I believe it was. But check it out. There's some YouTube documentary of it, and I believe that there's some audio of it as well. If I'm not mistaken, I think you could pull up some audio of it or a text version of it. But it's very interesting to research how he addressed that issue at the time, for sure. All right, folks, let's roll into an easy Sunday morning in a brand new week with a brand new trivia question. Off we go for October 23rd. Folks, October's almost done. I cannot believe this latter part of the year is flying by, like I've mentioned before, but like next week will be Halloween. Halloween's my favorite holiday, by the way, and I do consider it a holiday. Most definitely. Anywho, for October 23rd, your brand new trivia question is, long before the 1976 and the 2011 films, and even before the widely popular television cartoon series of the 1980s, this fictional group of small blue creatures who lived in mushroom-shaped houses in the forest debuted on this day in 1959 in a Belgium story called Johan den Perlo. That's a mouthful, folks. Let's see if you can figure it out. I guarantee you, if you're a Generation Xer like me, this was a part of your Saturday morning routine. Peace out.